It's WNYC. Stay with us just ahead. It's Marketplace. Tonight on the show, regional theaters across the country have faced some challenges recently. So some playhouses are choosing to adapt.
And that is this incredible moment. Some people call it crisis. I'm optimistic, so I called it the opportunity. Yeah. This is our moment to rethink what we're doing.
A look at the live theater industry from the Pasadena Playhouse in Southern California. That's on Marketplace tonight, coming your way in just a moment at 6:30. We'll have more All Things Considered at 7 o'clock tonight. It's 41 degrees. It's mostly cloudy right now. Some rain possible tonight. Some snow possible tonight. We'll have temperatures in the low 30s. It's WNYC at 6:30.
WNYC supporters include Practicing Law Institute, a nonprofit learning organization providing ever-current programs and publications to help attorneys and other professionals build their skills and expertise. More at pli.edu.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by McDermott, Will, and Emery, lawyers passionately working to help clients tackle their biggest challenges today in pursuit of their boldest vision of tomorrow. More at MWE.com.
On the program today, data for the economic mind, art for the economic soul. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Wealth Enhancement Group, dedicated to the art of financial planning backed by the science of investing. WealthEnhancement.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. It is Tuesday today, the 5th of December. Good as always to have you along, everybody. We're going to take a drive up the Arroyo Parkway to Pasadena in just a couple of minutes for a conversation about regional theater in this economy at the historic Pasadena Playhouse. First, though, a quick glance at some of the nuts and bolts of this economy, the labor market in particular, in the form of this morning's JOLTS data. Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey is what that stands for. Soft-ish is a word one might use to describe it.
Thomas Crummell, assistant professor of economics at North Dakota State University.
My name is Preston Moy. I'm a senior economist at Employ America.
Start my day with coffee, and it's dead week here at NDSU, so getting prepared for the undergrads who have finals next week and are anxious. So that was my morning.
I started with coffee. It was dark, cold, and rainy in Seattle.
Introductions and libations and weather aside, thoughts, gentlemen, about the data?
This is one of those reports where the news is not particularly interesting. It's honestly kind of a boring report, but I think that's good news.
The good news is that the number of job openings in this economy, and remember, the Fed watches the labor market, carefully, doesn't really do it justice. Job openings fell in October from 9.3 million in September to 8.7 million. That is good, but maybe not good enough yet.
We're still not back to that pre-pandemic world, but the number of job openings are starting to tend towards where we were before the pandemic.
One other data point to mention, separations. People leaving their jobs because they know they can get a better one, usually at higher pay. Basically unchanged, also good.
When I'm driving around the community, I still see the advertised wages being at the level that they were when we were dealing with the labor shortage in 2021. So to me, the separations is what I've been keeping an eye on, and I guess I will continue to do so.
Sum it all up.
In terms of our trajectory for a soft landing, this is about where we want to be.
Jolts today was kind of a amuse-bouche from the labor market. The main course comes Friday with the November unemployment report. Your guess, obviously, is as good as mine on how that one comes out. On Wall Street this Tuesday, mixed but unenthusiastically. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. Okay, 2 words here. Regional theater. 2 more words. Budget deficit. According to a report from the Theater Communications Group, which is, to be clear, an advocacy group for nonprofit theater, more than half of them said they are going to have a budget deficit next year. Nearly a third described themselves as either struggling to make ends meet or worse. So, up the Pasadena Freeway, I went the other day. Pasadena Playhouse, 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm Kai. Nice to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. Welcome.
Pay no attention to Jake. He's got the microphones. You get to hold your own.
Amazing. I'll try not to trip on it.
Right? Wires in this day and age. Tell me who you are and where we are.
My name is Danny Feldman. I'm the producing artistic director of Pasadena Playhouse, the State Theater, California. And we are standing in the beautiful historic courtyard of our building.
Full disclosure, I should tell you, I come here not all the time, but not infrequently. And it's great.
Thank you.
I love this place. So there's my bias going in. But this is not about this place as a physical place. It's about regional theater.
Yes.
And where you guys stand in the world. So before we go inside, situate us in the world of regional theater.
Yeah.
Here we are in late 2023.
So what most folks who just go to the theater, like live entertainment or that, they don't necessarily know, nor should they, the difference between commercial theater and regional theater, right? So we mainly think of theater as Broadway, Hamilton.
Sorry, interesting you say commercial as if it's like a bad thing, and regional.
No, it's not bad.
Right.
It's for-profit versus nonprofit. It is New York Times for-profit journalism, NPR public service journalism,
There
right?
you go.
Are we serving shareholders? Is our ultimate goal making money, or is our ultimate goal public service? The nonprofit regional theater was born out of a response to commercialism, out of a response to Broadway.
I should know this. How long has regional theater been a thing?
Well, it's tricky because Pasadena Playhouse is so old. It's like a terrible joke set up. But we are so old that theaters and entertainment and were not allowed to be nonprofits.
Oh, that's funny.
That was not put into the nonprofit code, right? It was charities. It wasn't allowed till much later. Pasadena Playhouse came in the 20s, or really founded in 1917. This building came in the 20s. But it was founded by a group of Midwesterners who were out here who said great communities need great culture. There was not a lot of regional theater. There was tours that would sort of come by, but think this was Orange Groves in 1917, right?
Literally.
Yeah, it was a new city by then. And so it was really an innovative and revolutionary thing that happened here that later would start happening all over the country. And the idea behind the regional theater movement later on in the 60s was that individual communities deserved world-class theater, just like Broadway was getting it. And so it really started as a reaction to theater artists going back to either their hometowns or going to new towns and saying, let's set up shop here. So it was a very hyper-local movement about making great art for communities. And that changed over time, but that was really the genesis and the birth of it.
Let's go inside. And as we go, here's the standard opening question. How's business?
You know, we're an outlier.
Yeah. Well, we're going
our
to get
business is going well, and we are very unique because.
So wait, I need you to describe this lobby for me because it's great, and people should understand what we're looking at.
We are in the lobby the historic lobby, right? That was opened in 1925. The very special thing in our lobby right now that you can see is our Regional Tony Award that we just got.
Congratulations!
We conveniently placed that.
I was going to say it's literally spotlit, but you know.
Yes, but it's on purpose because we feel that going to our subject matter, this is this theater and this community's Tony Award. And so we've put it right here so people basically trip on it getting into the theater.
Yeah, almost literally.
But we're in the historic lobby that every patron passes through to come see a show and have since 1925.
And it's fabulous. So you were saying you're doing better than most.
We are. And we, I took over this theater in late 2016, and we were having a rough go, I will say.
Yeah.
Not as rough as anyone probably knew publicly, not as rough, frankly, as I knew coming into it.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, those of us who come here knew that it was tricky.
It was tricky, and it had been tricky for a while.
Yeah.
Our ticket sales were struggling, our donations were struggling. So for us, our story, and I think that's part of why now we're at a different place, is we worked very hard digging out and getting community engagement again about this place. So by the time pandemic hit, we were coming into it in a different spot.
Well, so that's a good pause as we head into the house here because I want to sit down. So you're doing okay-ish as the pandemic hits, and then the pandemic hits. And what happens?
So it was brutal to the theater industry, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
We have people who, a lot of people cut their workforce. We cut our workforce tremendously. Some theaters as much as 80%. We weren't quite that high. And I think the bigger challenge, though, looking back now, was as everyone was racing to get the economy going again, to get business going, people didn't want to go to the theater. This was not a thing even with wearing masks, and we still have not recovered. Nationally, we are still, the latest figures are between 20 to 50% of pre-pandemic.
Really?
Yes, it is. Every theater's on a different journey on that, but some theaters have closed, right? There was a time last year where 2 to 3 theaters were closing a month.
How do you stay in business if you're at 20, 50%?
Correct. Well, a lot of what got us through it was the extraordinary government support, the largest government support of the arts in U.S. history, the Shuttered Venues Grant. We were fortunate here at the Playhouse to get a couple very large grants, which were designed to help us get back on your feet. Our argument to the funding community, to our community, and to the government was, it is going to take us longer to get back than everyone else. We are going to have to rethink business models. We already were dealing with some real struggles.
Tell me how you have rethought your business model.
Well, for us here, it's about a couple different directions. We ended the pandemic year, like a lot of businesses did, like a lot of theaters did, with surpluses. Because if you think about it,
and a lot of families too, actually, with surpluses.
You stopped putting shows on, but the money was still coming. A lot of our patrons who were been with us for years said, we'll let you keep our subscription money, right? We'll let you keep this. We'll still writing our checks. So our cost dramatically dropped and our revenue actually went up. Right. We made the decision that rather than storing all of that in the bank, we were going to take a chunk of it, of our saved up capital, something that this theater has never had, ever in our history. We passed a budget last season, which was the big season of our Sondheim celebration, our Tony winning season, all of that had $1 million deficit in the budget.
Wow.
Because we had a $3 million surplus the year before.
Yeah.
We hired more artists than we've ever hired that year. We hired more musicians. We hired more crew. It was the most ambitious thing we'd ever done.
So I came to see Sunday in the Park with George.
Yes.
Here. I still don't understand the second act of that thing. I don't understand the second act for life of me, right?
I can explain it to you.
The first act I was on board, and then the second act comes and you're like, what? Why are we doing this?
Well, do you want to talk about it? We don't need to talk about it.
It's our show. We can do whatever we want.
It's I think when the show opened, everyone felt that way too. Act 1 is about a genius who all he can see is his art at the cost of everything else in his life. Act 2 is a guy that I relate to sometimes, that all his art has sort of lost its way in many ways, but he is very good at the thing Act 1, his great-grandfather was not great at, which was schmoozing, socializing, raising money. Yeah. It's a great analogy to what we're talking about.
It is indeed.
Because for him to get his art done, it wasn't just about sitting in a room and making art. It was 95% about raising money and figuring it out. And so he's reconciling that. He's having a crisis of faith and he's inspired. And maybe the answer is a little bit of both. That's my life every day now.
Fair enough. I appreciate the lesson. I still don't know if I understand the second act. We will have our own second act with Danny Feldman. More on the business of regional theater coming up in the second half of the show. Coming up.
You were pushing up against the debt ceiling quicker than you otherwise would.
What's past is never really past, But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Industrial is off 79 points today, 0.2%, 36,124. The Nasdaq gained 44 points, about 0.3%, 14,229. The S&P 500 nearly flat, plus 2 points, less than 0.1%, 45 and 67. 4567. There you go. The shipping firm XPO has bought up the 28 service centers from the now closed down Yellow Corporation. That trucking company, you might remember, shuttered almost all of its operations and filed for bankruptcy. In August, shares of XPO drove down 4.3%. Wells Fargo says it expects to pay out nearly $1 billion in severance this quarter. The bank's already laid off 4.7% of its workforce this year, part of a cost-cutting and job-cutting trend among many big banks. Here's the logic. Higher interest rates mean fewer consumers, and firms seeking out loans equals less business for banks. You get the picture. Justin Ho's report on this a lot for us. Wells Fargo dipped 1.4%. JP Morgan Chase was flat. Morgan Stanley slid 1 3/10%. Shares of CVS Health jumped 3.7% today after it announced big changes to how it prices prescription drugs. The chain is moving toward a simpler model based on what CVS is actually paying for the drugs, plus, of course, markup because it's a business. The company says this change means some drugs will cost less for consumers. Others, of course, will be more expensive. Transparency is the goal. Here you're listening to Marketplace.
The Marketplace Numbers segment is supported by Odoo, simple management software for all your business needs. Marketplace is supported by Odoo, simple management software for all your business needs. Marketplace is supported by Schwab. Schwab knows that investors want control of their financial future. That's why when it comes to wealth management, Schwab is dedicated to giving investors more choices. More at schwab.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
Support for WNYC comes from Kiwi Partners, scalable bookkeeping, controller, and CFO services to nonprofits, also offering accounting technology, consulting, and HR services for growing nonprofits. More at kiwipartners.com/WNYC.
I'm Allison Stewart, host of All of It. Every day, WNYC delivers on its promise to embrace different perspectives, whether it's about the latest political news or what's happening in the arts. We're always here for you, helping to navigate this complicated world. But we can only do it with the support of our listeners. You count on us, we count on you. Please make a contribution now. Visit wnyc.org/donate or call 888-376-WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, the Supreme Court approaches a major tax case that could severely limit congressional options in enacting tax policy. We'll have that and much more in the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered. Stay tuned.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. All right, as promised, and even though I am still bewildered by the second act of Sunday in the Park with George, here's Act 2 of my conversation with Danny Feldman from the Pasadena Playhouse.
You're an artistic guy, right?
I'm unique and I'm both.
Well, that's where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
You're a programming artistic guy,
Yes.
but clearly now you have to have a business sensibility and experience. And explain that dichotomy.
So how most regional theaters were born, they were artistic driven. They would pass the hat around the community. People would put the money in. That was the budget.
Right.
That's how it worked, right?
Right.
Well, everyone started realizing that this is a subsidy model. And then they started to be thinking of themselves as businesses in different ways. There was a great study done now years ago. It was a foundational study for the American theater. And it basically looked at theater business at cost per unit, right? CPU. And the idea was the CPU for theater is one performance, right?
Okay, yeah.
One show.
Yep.
Okay, think about this. What do we have to do to make the show? We're sitting in a theater. There's some Christmas stuff going on. It's a whole other thing. But we have a production of it.
I was just going to say, what's the show running now?
Right now, the show that's running, there's a funny image we're both looking at on the stage because it's two things mixed together.
Oh,
but
right.
we are doing a new take on Inherit the Wind.
Got it.
Revitalized take on Inherit the Wind.
Alfred Molina, right?
Alfred Molina,
Yeah.
John Douglas
Yeah.
Thompson. It's
Yeah.
extraordinary, whole fresh new take on it. Very relevant today. One of our top box office hits we've had in decades here. We're doing
Interesting.
very well.
How much of that is Alfred Molina and how much of that is your programming decision?
Who the hell knows? How do I know that? I don't know. I mean, I'll take
It's
some
like marketing.
credit.
Part of it works, part of it doesn't.
Exactly.
Right.
It's all of it. It's everything
That's
together.
fair. Okay.
So that show, to make this show here, we had to all get in a rehearsal room, and it took about 4 weeks. And then they do the show. We're paying those people to do the show. Then you have the cost of getting butts and seats. We now have to pay marketing that we didn't have to pay in the 60s as much, or in the 50s, 40s, 30s. So the study basically said the CPU for one night of theater is going to double every 10 years. And that's to infinity.
Right.
That's not going anywhere away.
So I will not be the first person to point out to you that that's not sustainable.
Correct. And I think the moment we're feeling in the American theater right now is there's periods of time where that catches up with you. Where
This place has had it several times.
Correct. And that is this incredible moment. Some people call it crisis. I'm optimistic, so I call it the opportunity.
Yeah.
This is our moment to rethink what we're doing.
So you're the boss, man. You're in charge. What
Yes.
are you going to do?
Well,
it's your job to take this theater company
That's right.
and this place into, the 2030s and beyond.
That's right. And so this is about, number one, communicating to everyone. We are a subsidy model, right? Everyone thinks theater. You think,
And we have to be okay with that.
yes.
Okay.
Because of our public service. We're in a world now, don't get me started on this, but we're in a world now where politically it's people can't sit in the same room together and talk. We literally bring strangers together in a room to play make-believe with one another. It's ridiculous if you think about it. We're all going to collectively say we're going to watch something and play pretend to one another and have a shared experience. But I will go back to the commercial theater and the Hamilton conversation. Hamilton started in a nonprofit theater, right? The research and development that other businesses have, we are the research and development. Shows start in nonprofit theaters all the time, but more importantly, artists work here. There's not a single artist that is on Broadway today that is a star that people know, a set designer, lighting designer, director, that has not worked in the nonprofit regional theater. Those people who are on Broadway are also doing film and TV. They're same writers, right? It's one pool. We are the engine to that. And so why so many of us are ringing the alarm bell of the crisis of our field is we're going to see this downstream. And we cannot stop producing shows, which is already, takes a lot out of you, while re-envisioning a future model for something that, I got a music degree. What do I know about economics? We're figuring it out. We're a scrappy bunch of people who are going to figure this out.
Danny Feldman, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's often a thing this time of year to take stock of the 12 months past, and for the bad stuff, leave it behind as best we can. But a lot of economic news tends to stick around well into the future. Take, just for instance, the most recent fight over the debt limit. It got pretty nasty this year, and it has done the same in many years gone by. And it turns out those decades of debt ceiling dramas continue to haunt our economy and our lives. Marketplace's Stacey Vanek Smith takes us to visit 3 ghosts of debt limits past.
There have been about 80 debt ceiling battles since 1960. But those decades of drama have never led to the U.S. actually defaulting. Lawmakers always find a last-minute compromise so the U.S. can keep paying its bills. No tangible damage, right?
Well, it is pretty tangible.
This is John Chambers, here to tell us about one ghost of debt ceilings past.
I'm the former chairman of Standard & Poor's Sovereign Ratings Committee.
That committee gives credit scores to countries. Chambers headed it in 2011 during an historic moment when S&P downgraded the U.S.'s credit rating from AAA to AA+. One of the main reasons?
The debt ceiling.
S&P said the recurring fights about whether the U.S. should pay its bills creates a risk that one day it won't.
The debt ceiling gives you a clear path to default, and it might even happen by accident. That is not consistent with a AAA rating.
A downgrade from AAA to AA+ might sound pretty mild, but it was a major blow to the economy. When a country's credit rating goes down, it has to pay more to borrow money. After that downgrade in 2011, markets crashed and investors lost billions. People even went after Chambers himself.
I got a lot of hate mail and death threats.
You got death threats?
Yes. I had a personal bodyguard. Every time I went out to walk the dog, the guard went with me.
All because lawmakers cannot seem to stop fighting about the debt limit. But the 2011 credit downgrade is far from the scariest ghost of debt ceilings past. For that, we have to go back to the very first debt ceiling fight.
My fellow Americans.
Dwight Eisenhower was president. The year was 1953, exactly 70 years ago.
I should mention our enormous national debt. We must begin to make some payments on it.
Economist Kenneth Garbade has studied that first fight, At the time, government debt totaled around $275 billion.
Eisenhower, he asked for an expansion in the debt ceiling by $15 billion, but the Senate turned him down.
To keep the U.S. from hitting the debt ceiling, the Eisenhower administration scrambled to slash the budget.
We did not delay in cutting deep into governmental expenditures.
Some government projects were axed, others were pushed off the books, including a Depression-era program known as Fannie Mae. Fannie bought mortgage loans from banks to encourage home buying, and the program was a big success. But back then, all those mortgages went right onto the government's books. Every loan was piled onto the national debt.
The sticking point was that Fannie Mae contributed to the national debt. So you were pushing up against the debt ceiling quicker than you otherwise would.
So Fannie Mae was rebooted into a private-ish government-backed entity. Instead of using all government money, it would have private investors, like a regular company. But Fannie Mae wasn't a regular company. And here's where our debt ceiling ghost rises again. Because Fannie wasn't entirely on the government's books anymore, the government couldn't control it fully. But Fannie was still part of a government program, so it could never go bankrupt. Its rich Uncle Sam would bail it out, right? At least, says Garbade, that is what investors assumed 5 decades later when they pushed Fannie Mae to buy up super risky home loans.
That's ultimately how we got into the whole Fannie Mae situation in 2008.
The whole Fannie Mae situation, our scariest debt ceiling ghost. You might remember back in 2008, a whole lot of Fannie's loans turned toxic. It was failing. Garbade was at the New York Federal Reserve Bank at the time.
I was shocked. When the stuff hits the fan, it's so quick and so unexpected that people are in a real tizzy, as my mother used to say.
A tizzy that ended up costing Uncle Sam nearly $200 billion. It was one of the biggest government bailouts in history. President Eisenhower probably never imagined that restructuring Fannie Mae to stay under the debt ceiling would one day contribute to a global financial crisis.
Our overriding concern is not with the elaborate theories of economics, but the plain well-being of all the people.
In 1954, Congress finally agreed to raise the debt ceiling. But that fight, over $15 billion, helped cause a multi-trillion-dollar global economic crisis decades later, one that caused millions of people to lose their homes, their jobs, their savings. Which brings us to our final economic ghost of debt ceiling's present. Well, actually, debt ceiling's future. This year's debt fight was suspended. It will come back to haunt us in January of 2025. In New York, I'm Stacey Vanek Smith for Marketplace.
Nothing like a good Dickens reference, right? Hey, so look, if you missed the program on the actual radio, it happens. We get it. We've got a podcast, platform of your choice, of course.
Marketplace is supported by Viking, exploring the world in comfort. Viking offers a small ship experience with cultural enrichment and destination-focused dining. More at Viking.com. And by the American Opportunity Index, a new ranking of how well companies invest in talent and advance employees' careers. More at AmericanOpportunityIndex.org.
This final note on the way out today, inflation of a different kind, and no, not strictly a marketplace story, but interesting in its own way. Saw this in the New York Times today. Credit properly goes to the Yale Daily News. A recent report from an ad hoc committee on grading at Yale that almost 80% of all grades given to undergraduates at that particular institution were A's or A minuses. 3.7 out of 4.0 is the average GPA. Grade inflation's apparently been a thing for years in that corner of the Ivy League, exacerbated, the report says, by the pandemic. Our digital and on-demand team includes Carrie Barber, Dylan Mietinen, Janet Wynn, Olga Oxman, Ellen Rolfes, Virginia K. Smith, and Tony Wagner. Francesca Levy is the Executive Director of Digital and On-Demand. I'm Kai Risdall. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.